important to mention that all the microphones are actually muted. And in case you want them to ask questions, there will be a question and answer session in the second part of the meeting. And then you can either write your questions on the chat, or you can also raise your hand, and then we will unmute your microphone. There will be few presentations after the introductions, and then there will be the question and answer session. We aim to stay into 1 hour for the meeting. And now I'm very pleased to leave the floor to Paola Benea to give a few introductory words. Paola, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniele. Good afternoon all, good morning to those joining us from the other side of the world. I'm glad to open today's meeting that will present to you a mechanism that we designed to support the engagement of diaspora organizations in the humanitarian context, with a focus on the countries where diaspora is based. The model was drawn from the initiative that IOM Mission has been carrying out with the Ukrainian diaspora in Italy since March 2022 to support its efforts in providing humanitarian assistance to war-affected population in Ukraine and aid to displaced Ukrainians who have been arriving to Italy. We all know that well-engaged diasporas may help governments and communities resolve a crisis, deal with its humanitarian consequences, and contribute to post-crisis recovery and rehabilitation. Thanks to their links with countries of origin and crisis-affected populations, diaspora organizations are indeed able to access difficult areas, have a closer view of the needs, and carry out targeted actions. Members of the diasporas are often the first responders and the first to take investment risks, and have the potential to reinvigorate and fuel more enduring social and economic development after the crisis. In different crises, both man and natural made, such as Syria, Somalia, Haiti, and now Ukraine, diaspora organizations proved their ability to quickly mobilize and release resources, also laying the ground for reconstruction and sustainable development. The transfer of diaspora skills can strengthen and build health, education, justice, and other institutions in a crisis-affected country, and migrants and diaspora members can in turn mobilize other support for rehabilitation of the country of origin. A call to involve non-institutional actors such as diasporas within broader humanitarian architecture in a more systematic manner, was launched at the World Humanitarian Summit back in 2016, where the community recognized the role that these actors have historically played. Diasporas have been for long an important partner of IOM's work in both development work, but also in responding crisis. Over the last years, an increasing number of dedicated initiatives have contributed towards advancing this agenda through capacity building of diasporas, promotion of new partnerships, and coordination frameworks. Among these, I'll just mention a few, such as the Framework for Diasporas Engagement in Humanitarian Assistance developed by IOM Washington in cooperation with the Haiti Renewal Alliance, the initiative of DMAC that works for deeper understanding of diaspora's humanitarian actors and striving for better coordination between the diaspora's organizations and the humanitarian system, the tools created by Shabaka, the knowledge sharing encouraged globally within the platform iDiaspora created by IOM, and the work launched by the Global Diaspora Confederation. As the humanitarian system have to meet growing complex needs more effectively and to bridge the humanitarian development divide, we hope that this model, designed in a way to be adaptable to other crises and national contexts, can contribute to ongoing efforts to support diaspora in active partner and during different stages of a crisis. I therefore am glad to now continue and open the meeting. I would like now to also acknowledge the participation of Director General Tatiana Esposito. Daniela, I will leave now the floor to you, or I will invite Ms. Esposito to continue the presentations or the introductions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Paola. Yes, now the floor is actually also for Mrs. Esposito, the Director General of the DG on Immigration and Integration Policy at the Ministry of Labor and Social Policies. And we are actually also, I also would like to thank her for her presence here, but also for the support along all this journey. Mrs. Esposito, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danielle and Paola. Good afternoon, good morning to all the participants. And actually, I want to thank you, to thank IOM for having invited me today to say a few words at the beginning of this webinar. It's very important for us to be here because we have been working hard in recent years on the issue of diaspora and engagement, in line with the indications coming from international and European institutions. I would like to mention here the EU Action Plan on Integration and Inclusion, but this is also one of the main goals of our Directorate General. And this is why for us today's meeting is particularly valuable, and we can learn a lot of lessons from this white paper which is launched today. This white paper, I would say, suggests a model to engage diasporas. And I want to stress even before and beyond the humanitarian context. And it allows us to understand how to read more in depth and more realistically the needs of the diaspora organizations, and also paves the way for a potential systematic dialogue between these organizations and institutions at all levels, national, regional, or even at local level. Diaspora organizations are, for us, an important means of participation, of solidarity, of dialogue, but they're also, in many cases, fragile, volatile subjects. So it's important, first of all, to know knowledge of these realities. So to know who they are, what they do, in which field or sectors they're active. It's the first step, I would say, for any successful engagement pathway. This is why, since almost 10 years, since 2014, we regularly map the presence of migrants associations in our country. We have this database, which is publicly available for everyone on our Integration of Migrants portal, and we publish every year annual reports on the 16 main largest non-EU communities living in our country. But after knowledge, then we need dialogue, a direct dialogue with these realities, with these subjects. And in this direction, we are running since a few years an initiative called Voice to the Diasporas, which is a series of meetings with representatives of migrants organizations that we are running since a few years. And in the same direction goes also the involvement of these associations in the consultative process that we ran last year on our new programming documents for the 2021-2027 programming period. So we had a direct dialogue with these associations on our new programming framework for the next years. I would like to conclude that in this way, I mean, we have learned a lot of lessons, including from this work with the IOM. And I think there are a couple of directions that's in front of us for other work to be done. And these two main issues are the issue of representation and the issue of structuring of associations. And this has to go with the reversal of our perspective. So we are used to design policies for migrants, but we should learn how to design policies with migrants. And this is what we tried to do in this last exercise of consulting them during the setting and the defining of our programming document. So for this reason, I again underlined our great appreciation for the work done in this field, and many thanks for this path initiated by IOM with the Ukrainian diasporas, which we have immediately supported because it was really close to our heart, to the way we used to work, and we firmly believe it represents a model that we can replicate in other contexts and maybe also with other communities. So again, many thanks and good work to everyone for this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Esposito. I think it's really an important endeavor actually we have been going through, and I think it's just the starting point, because unfortunately, as we can see also from the news these days, crises are always there, and it's important to try to find solutions to be as effective as possible in responding to them. And this was actually one of our starting point in defining why we should involve diasporas during the response to a humanitarian crisis. We started in the first place from what is the added value of diaspora and what they can actually bring in the process. And the first thing that I think it's important to mention is their capacity of being usually there over time. So they are not associations or organizations that tend to enter into a crisis because of the emerging needs in that very moment, but because they are there even before and after a crisis happens. And this is an important added value that should be always taken into consideration. Now I can't have the slide. Of course, I was waiting for the technical problem to come. But anyway, I think this was the starting point. And this starting point was also something that is guiding our work, not only on this emergency response process, but also on other kind of activities. And this comes also into a broader discussion that is actually happening on how localizing aid, because it is now very clear that because of certain emergencies that we faced in the past, starting from the pandemic, but also others, the role of local actors is really critical and crucial because they have a better understanding of the context most of the time, because they have very relevant understanding of the situations and the dynamics that they are in, but also because, as I was mentioning at the beginning, it's a possibility to keep the presence in the long term. So we are into these flows of thinking and reasoning, but we are also supported by a legal framework in Italy that is also very good, which is the law 125, which is actually a very important law because it is the one that reframes international cooperation, giving a clear role also to diaspora organizations and recognizing their capacity. It is actually because of this law that we have been supported also by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs along these years, and I think also their support was really critical in all this process. So because of that, we started in 2020 an initiative to respond to the pandemic. This was done with the diaspora organizations in Italy because of their presence in some places, in some areas that were difficult difficult to access for the usual, for the other players, but also because they had the chance to already activate interest and raise awareness on what was actually happening also to their countries abroad, so to the countries of origin. So this is actually, it was a kind of starting point, and through this first experience, we launched an Amico emergency response. Amico is a national program that we implement since 2010, actually, and there is also a kind of re-granting and sub-granting scheme, which we decided to use also for the response of the pandemic emergency. Then we continued when it was when there was also the other emergency that were coming up, and we started first actually having a better understanding of what was the Afghani diaspora doing in Italy to respond to the crisis in Afghanistan. But at the same time, the Afghani community in Italy is not very strong, is not too structured, because the numbers are actually increasing now, but at the moment the community is not as big as others, like the Ukrainian community, for instance. So when there was the crisis in Ukraine, we tried to find a way to engage the diaspora organizations also in this situation. So of course the starting points are different. On one side, you need to have the sense of urgency that is given by a humanitarian crisis to have the people coming together. On the other side, you need also to have the presence. As simple as that. You need to have a structured, organized ecosystem, I would say, of diaspora organizations that are actually already intervening in those kind of contexts and are actually already able to provide their support. And then, of course, it's also important to have the kind of framework, the legal framework, or anyway, the conducive framework, a conducive environment that would allow also other actors to come together, which was actually what was activated because of the crisis in Ukraine, which was a state of emergency in Italy to ensure that the contribution of the country to not only to the country, but also to the people that were coming from Ukraine to Italy was done in the proper, in the most appropriate manner. So at that time, there were also many different coordination meetings that were happening at the same time. So in all those meetings, we realized that there were many stakeholders at the table, that many organizations were actually discussing how to provide support to the Ukrainian community in Italy. But what was actually missing was the voice of the Ukrainians. So we suggested to include also the voice and the representation of diaspora organizations that were coming from Ukraine. Of course, it was not just a matter of creating a seat or creating a space for this voice to be heard, but also to make sure that this voice was somehow recognized as important, as representative from the community as a whole. So we started organizing a number of different online conferences. We were inviting different organizations that we came across. In fact, we started with what we knew, and then we requested them also to indicate and to inform us about other organizations they were aware of, so that we started a kind of snowball effect through which it was possible to have a sort of rapid assessment or a sort of mapping of the diaspora organizations that were present in Italy. And we were actually surprised, because we are working with diaspora organizations since many years, but we didn't know that there were so many Ukrainian diaspora organizations in Italy. And at the end, we ended up having around 60, mapping around 60 associations. And out of those 60 associations, actually 50 replied with interest to this initiative and decided to join forces somehow, and also to join those meetings. So the first point was actually the organization of those different conferences. Through those conferences, though, we managed also to create the venue and the place for different organizations to come together, coordinate their efforts, and also choose a person, a representative that could actually represent them in those kind of fora I was mentioning before. So we started this initiative. This initiative is built on two different pillars or two blocks. The first one is actually the coordination mechanism through the conferences, the online conferences. And then the second pillar is a sub-granting mechanism that we have developed on the basis of our previous experiences, the one I was mentioning about Amico Emergency for the response to the pandemic. So what were the conferences about? The first point was really very much about coming together and knowing what everyone was doing in this situation, having a better understanding on what were the different activities different organizations were implementing, where were the areas they were actually operating in, not only in Ukraine but also in Italy, and also to find solutions to logistical problems, because there were many, especially at the beginning, but also to come up with a list of needs and priorities that could then be channeled through all those different stakeholders and institutions that were responding to the crisis. The modality of those conferences were online. We had, though, an initial meeting that was only at the national level, and then we continued having meetings at the national levels, but we decided also to have a meeting at the local levels, because there were many activities, a lot of action that was happening also at the local level, and the coordination was important to be happening there as well. And we continued on a monthly basis also to have those local and national meetings. Then each conference, namely each national or local conference, also defined their own terms of reference, defined how they were actually functioning, and decided how to choose or select a spokesperson, someone that could actually be invited to those coordination meetings, or could have a meeting with institutions whenever they were requested. And this was actually the case that happened at the very beginning with the Ministry of Labor, and it was really precious to have their support, but also with other ministries, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Civil Protection. That was actually the department that was charged with the responsibility of organizing the response to the crisis in Italy. And they were actually the ones who got in contact at the beginning very often with the spokesperson. And it was very important also for them to have a better understanding of what were the priorities that the communities, the Ukrainian community in Italy, was giving to them. Then, of course, after the mechanism of the conferences, it's, I think, very important to have another practical tool, which is the sub-granting mechanism that would allow the associations and organizations to be able to respond to the crisis, supporting what they were already doing in fact, because most of them were already implementing activities. What we launched was a sub-granting mechanism for just €8,000 per project, and then this money could be used to support activities that they were already implementing. This is actually a very important point. Then I guess I think Roberta will tell you something more about this point, but how it's important not to create completely new projects, but actually to start with what is already there and support what is already happening. So we launched a call for proposal. We received a number of 14 different proposals, and out of those 14 proposals, 7 were actually funded, and they were operating in a variety of different sectors. As you can see here, it's food, transportation, and distribution, but also shelter, health, psychological support, and they were covering different regions, different oblasts in Ukraine. This was also because of the different areas and regions of origin of the community in Italy. Out of all this process, I think it's important to mention that 52 associations were actually engaged in the entire process, and they are actually now cooperating much more than they were used to. In some cases, many of those associations didn't know each other, in fact. There were 5 national conferences that were organized and 4 rounds of local conferences in four regions. And then, of course, there is also this white paper, which is just a tool that we think it's important for others also to take into consideration, just starting from our experience. We don't aim to have developed a model that is replicable the way it is, just taking and using it somewhere else. It's not a solution that is not one size solution that fits every context. On the contrary, we think that every context has its own specificities, and I think it's important then just to try to get inspiration to this from this model rather than just simply replicate it. And try to see how we try to respond to some of the challenges and what were the different experiences that we learned. And actually the learning, I think, it's the main outcome, especially for us. And there were many things that we would do differently in the future, starting from actually spending more time on the preliminary analysis, because this is actually something that we activated just because there was the crisis. But it would have been much better if we knew already what the Ukrainian diaspora was already doing, for instance, in terms of providing aid to Ukraine, but also to making sure that this conductive and conducive environment and the legal framework is protected in a way and can be there and maintained. Also making sure that there is a management of expectations and there are clear objectives among all the different stakeholders involved. It's important to spend time and have dedicated human resources, because we started thinking that, of course, it was an exercise that we were doing because it was important to respond to the humanitarian crisis at that time. But then it required a lot of effort, a lot of time. And then it's also important to making sure that the voices of the diasporas are heard, that there is an efficient communication, and also appropriate modalities for the sub-granting and training for the diaspora organizations. This is actually another important learning, because we started with small funding, also because we need to take into account also the capacity of implementing those projects, especially at the time where the priorities are completely different. So maybe it's very complicated for the diaspora organizations that is fighting against time also to avail time and energies and resources for reporting, for developing a project proposal, and so on. So it's important to adapt those kind of sub-granting mechanism to the context and not try to simplify the process as much as possible. Basically, this is a very important lesson that we learned through this process. And then, of course, it's also about making sure that there is a strong coordination about all humanitarian actors, and thinking about new emergencies that might actually come up, or thinking about emergencies that are actually happening now, unfortunately. I think what is really important is also to try to make sure that if there is this kind of effort in organizing those conferences, this effort is very well coordinated, because we were somehow lucky of being the first one in Italy to launch the idea, and and to have the institutional backing from all the different institutions involved. But of course, if there might be situations where you have different initiatives coming up at the same time to coordinate different diaspora organizations, then would end up really in a struggle. Also because, especially in the initial phase, it was very complicated to gain the attention of diaspora organizations because they were very busy doing other things. And then it's also important to think about an exit strategy. So not only about the closing of this phase of the emergency response, but also to what could happen afterwards. Because as I was mentioning at the beginning, one of the added value of the diaspora organizations is in fact their capacity of being there before and after any crisis happens. So thank you very much. And I would leave directly now the floor to Roberta because she would go to the important aspect of this presentation. Roberta, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniele, and thank you very much to IOM Rome and colleagues, especially Marina and Marcella, and all of you for having given me the opportunity to look into this very remarkable case study and experience. And as we said, the hope is really to make the lessons learned from this experience available to all the actors that are wishing to engage diasporas in a more effective way for better humanitarian assistance. And I think the number of participants here today is a testimony of how this is a very relevant topic. And unfortunately, as you know, a tragedy unfolds in these days in Turkey and Syria, we know how important it is to maintain a multi-stakeholder approach to humanitarian assistance and recovery and bridging toward development in order to provide the best and most effective support possible to affected communities. So I will take it from where Daniele left. Daniele gave us an overview of the experience that occurred in Italy last year and is still ongoing. And what we have done here is to try to extract some of the best practices and lessons learned from this experience. And then based on this analysis, to come up with a model which we hope can be replicable and adaptable to other contexts and other diaspora communities. And we know already in IOM, there are many missions that are very interested in knowing how the different steps of this experience were implemented and how it can be tailored to their context. And the focus here is on diaspora engagement for humanitarian assistance in country of residence. So you will see the acronym COR here, meaning country of residence, which in this case was Italy, but obviously is applicable to every context and country where there are significant diaspora communities that maintain important ties with their country of origin. But also with the subgranting component that has been already introduced is an important financial and capacity building support for boosting diaspora's interventions in their country of origin, in Ukraine in this case, but also other contexts. In terms of methodology, the way in which this white paper was, this model that is described in the white paper was developed is through a mixed approach. On one hand, we did a desk review of existing case studies, and there has been a lot, I will say a little bit more about this, but there has been a lot lately over the last, I would say, few years. There has been a lot of development in terms of trying to systematize a big disengagement in humanitarian assistance and recovery. So there is a lot to learn from other case studies as well. And then we did obviously direct data collection, hearing from representatives of diaspora organizations that were involved in the initiatives. So a sample of those representatives, as well as representatives from the institutional actors that were involved in Italy. Next. I don't know if I can move directly or maybe, yes. So the suggested model is composed of three macro components. So there was a preparatory phase, and then there is a coordination mechanism and the funding. Here you will see what Daniele explained is very helpful to understand how these different steps have been generalized in a way that can become almost a step-by-step outline that can be used and followed in the model replication. So for each of these macro components, there are subcomponents. And obviously the white paper, when you will have the opportunity to read it, goes very much into the details, but here we will give a very general overview. It might sound a bit technical, but I hope that you will be able to pick and choose the aspects of it that are more interesting for your specific work. Next. So the preparatory phase has the main aim of setting the stage for the engagement. And obviously the foundational aspect of it is to define the overall scope of the engagement. And the scope will vary depending on the context, depending on the crisis, depending on the capacities and the needs and the priorities of the diaspora organizations involved. But this is a very foundational stage, and the scope needs to be clear, needs to be well communicated to all the stakeholders involved. And obviously, as Daniele was saying, in this specific case, the scope was twofold. On one end, there was the effort to foster internal coordination among diaspora organization actors. Some of them were, as Daniele was saying, were not even in contact with one another, or their contacts were very sporadic, very ad hoc. So the hope was to create a more formalized and structured coordination, but also liaise those diaspora actors with institutional humanitarian actors that were involved or leading the response. And then the other scope was to provide financial support as a boost for operations on the ground. Then another aspect that was mentioned here already is the conducive institutional legal environment. So ideally, it would be great to have an existing legal framework that recognizes diasporas as relevant actors in humanitarian and development efforts. And this creates a fertile ground for the engagement. And I would say that Italy, in this case, is really at the forefront of formalizing this engagement through a legal and institutional conducive landscape. But obviously, this is the existence of an environment institutionally. It's an important prerequisite, but needs to be accompanied by open and regular communication and engagement with diaspora organizations. Ideally, this would happen not only in the implementation phase of the response, but also in the strategic and the decision-making phase. I think the Director General Esposito at the beginning, she was mentioning how, we really strive to move from working for migrant community to working with migrant communities, and engaging diasporas in the consultation phase is key toward achieving that role. Then another important aspect is the definition of the target group and the stakeholders. And this is important because obviously, as we know, working with diaspora communities are very diverse within themselves internally. And although there is a relevance in terms of engaging individual members of the diaspora that can be involved, for example, for awareness raising, communication campaign, crowdfunding, fundraising, there is we have seen in this case and also in other cases that engaging diaspora organizations with a certain degree of formalization, so organizations that are already registered, that they have prior experience in humanitarian response or prior experience in liaising, interfacing with institutional actors, this really benefits the engagement. So those actors are usually the ideal interlocutors. And if they are existing, would be helpful also to have the possibility to interface with network of diaspora organization, umbrella or coalitions, in order to increase the representativeness of the engagement and be sure that there is that these organizations that are engaged are not only speaking on behalf of themselves, but they can represent a larger constituencies. An important tool in this preparatory phase, what Daniele was saying, is the mapping. So I will not spend much time here, but as maybe most of us have been involved, and also the Director General Esposito was saying how the government itself is conducting, in this case, mapping exercises in order to be sure that diaspora communities are known, and there is a process of trust building and community building that is created even before the crisis hits. Because when the crisis hits, the timing is very tense and very tight. So ideally, it would be great to create this mutual knowledge and understanding the needs, the capacities, the profiles, the areas of intervention, and the priorities of the diasporas beforehand. So going to the next phase is what is the coordination. So here coordination can take place in many ways. In the case of Italy, the choice was made to have national and local conferences, and I think there was a very interesting. This is a very interesting, really case study that could be easily replicated in other contexts. So obviously, even when starting these coordination platforms, it's important to clarify the mandate. And this definition should be done as much as possible in close consultation with the diaspora actors that are engaged, to be sure that the engagement is relevant to their own scopes and their own priorities. So during this phase of clarifying the mandate, we need to look at objectives, timeframes, roles and responsibilities, different modalities and different functions. The coordination can really play different functions. And here, I think we have really looked at how one single coordination platform can have a multi-layered scope. So they served as a platform for information sharing, peer-to-peer support, joint advocacy, promotion of collaborative actions, the representations vis-a-vis external actors. I'll say a little bit more about that. Address concrete operational challenges that were occurring in delivering assistance, both in country of origin and in country of residence. And also, as we said, here there was the very interesting idea to have two layers of coordination in terms of geographical representation, one at the national level and one at the local level. And we have heard from the diaspora organizations how these two levels were able to pursue complementary and equally relevant objectives. Then there is a very key aspect here, which is the facilitator role. And we have seen in other cases, also in other contexts, how the role of a facilitator, in this case played by IOM, which has, an independent and neutral nature, is key for diaspora organizations and also for liaising those organizations to institutional actors. And this role can be interpreted in many ways, depending on the context and the needs. But in each occasion, I think what is important is to balance between the importance of having a neutral actor that can provide guidance and support and be a kind of catalyst for diaspora's own engagement. And on the other hand, allow for diasporas to have the ownership and the control over the process so that they can feel represented and express their voice more directly. And also some key features of this role that we've seen IOM play very well in this case are neutrality, credibility, expertise, cultural competency, contextual knowledge, and direct and open communication, reliability. So I think this was very much appreciated by the diaspora organizations and can be replicated in other contexts. Here, another important role was the one played by the spokesperson of the diaspora organizations. And obviously, it's clear why this is important is because, in an engagement that is able to bring together more than 50 diaspora organizations, it's important to have a person that can somehow elevate the different voices and the different needs in a joint and coordinated manner. And this is relevant and has been appreciated also by the institutional actors that were interfacing with diaspora organizations so that they could have a single entry point. And this role was also well played in the sense that was able to bridge the local instances that were collected at the local level, at the regional level, and bring them back within institutional humanitarian fora. Obviously, there are complexities related to this role, and there are complementary modalities that could be chosen and could be applied. For example, a rotation of this role in order to increase the representativeness, and also, for example, as it's been done in other cases, to create within the broader coordination platform, to create working groups that have a specific technical expertise or that focus on different sectors with focal points per sector. This could help also in interfacing with institutional actors. Next. So still continuing on the coordination mechanism, I think what we've seen is the modalities that we've discussed, what are the best communication channels. We know the diasporas like to use like WhatsApp groups or like other communication channels that are more informal, more personal, direct, like phone calls. in-person contacts that also foster trust building, and also the importance of elaborating agenda items within the coordination platforms that are really relevant for the diasporas and that are also able to evolve over time as the situations on the ground evolve, because we know that in humanitarian context, the needs are rapidly changing. But also it's important to balance this evolution also with some key aspects related to the adherence to humanitarian principles, for example, of neutrality, a presence of a neutral actor like IOM can help upholding to that adherence. Another key aspect that we mentioned is the liaison with institutional actors. And I think in this case, really, the way in which this was conducted was quite exemplary. Different actors were involved, both at the national level and the local level, embassies, consulates, civil protection, different line ministries, and the cooperation agency. And all these actors obviously had different roles and mandates, but I think this is something that needs to be considered also for the follow-up. And here brings me to the last point, which is the exit strategy and sustainability. So as we know, sometimes exit strategy and sustainabilities are afterthoughts, but it's important to consider them since the very beginning and try to think about, what's the time frame of the engagement, communicate this time frame, and also think about what can happen after the role of the facilitator is phasing out, how diaspora communities can actually take over or mainstream some of these engagement efforts within existing institutional platform. For example, Italy has this very interesting experience of the diaspora, of the Summit of the Diasporas, and how, for example, conversations around humanitarian assistance could be included and bridging toward development work. I think that would be interesting to see as well. Next. So the third phase was the subgranting. When we wrote the white paper, we were in the IOM Rome was in the process of selecting and disbursing the subgrants. But also there are other case studies here, like an interesting, for example, project currently implemented by IOM DC, providing subgrants to diaspora organizations in responding to COVID-19. We just conducted the final conference reviewing the best practices of that experience, and we see a lot of similarities and complementarities between the experience. For example, definitely the scope is to boost or scale up existing initiatives and somehow leverage what is the diaspora's added value in a way that is complementary to what other actors on the ground are doing. And in order to do that, for example, some specific requirements and criteria can help, for example, ensuring that there is a partnership already existing on the ground, there is adherence to humanitarian principles and standards, and I think the interesting aspect of the subgrants here is also that there is a twofold objective. On one end is the financial boosting, but also capacity building, training, coaching that can happen at the same time during and before project implementation. And this has been considered very valuable by diaspora organizations that can see this experience also as a way to further professionalize their own initiatives. And then the last point is promoting coordination with actors on the ground. And this is because we know as when a crisis hits, many actors feel committed and compelled to intervene. Diasporas are very much fueled by a sense of solidarity, and they are some of the first responders, but often this can create a chaotic response if it's not well coordinated, and if there are no at least some possible interfaces that happen between institutional humanitarian actors, government, UN, and diaspora actors. So the role of the facilitators can also be helpful in this sense. So now moving forward, there are just some positive externalities. By externalities here, we mean some unintended, interesting and positive outcomes that were reached and were, also pursued through this initiative. For example, the transnational coordination with other DOs. This is another level. So we talked about internal coordination, but it's also but diasporas are by nature transnational communities. So, for example, thanks to the network of IOM country missions, we were able to organize an event in cooperation with IOM Ukraine. Actually, it was led by IOM Ukraine, where some of the diaspora organizations from Italy were able to present and also have this peer-to-peer exchange and learning, which was very relevant. And I think that, this always triggers the idea of transnational diaspora communities. And there are also new initiatives happening in this sense, like the Global Diaspora Confederation is an attempt to bring diasporas from different communities and different countries of residence and origin together. Then there is the importance of mainstreaming the institutional coordination. So obviously an experience like this has as a beginning as an end, although many crises are often protracted, but I think it's important, we think it's important to ensure that some of these institutional and coordination liaison that have been created during this initiative can be mainstreamed. And I think Italy in this case is a very interesting example where diasporas are more and more mainstreamed around formal consultative tables, and I think can be really replicated by other actors. We have learned also that engagement in conflict settings is different and is very peculiar vis-a-vis, for example, engagement in natural disasters. And it carries a number of complexities in terms of neutrality, in terms of independency, of separation between the humanitarian aid and the work of, the military. And I think it's important to be aware of those sensitivities and try to navigate them properly. And I think the role of IOM in this sense is helpful, because IOM is at the same time a humanitarian actor and also an actor that works very closely with diaspora communities. Another aspect is really, if the final scope is to make the assistance more effective, I think it's important to always keep in mind complementarity. How do we ensure that fostering diaspora's intervention is done in a way that is really complementary with what local actors, community organizations, governments, international actors are already doing on the ground, and there is no overlapping of interventions. And then finally, the localization agenda. This is an agenda which is very much at the core of the work of all of us. The overall goal is to increase the ownership and the control of this process by local communities. And we have seen how the involvement of diasporas that work very closely with local actors, and by doing so, they also contribute towards increasing the capacities and the resilience of local communities. I think this can really help us to advance the localization agenda. Finally, sorry, it's a lot of content. I'm trying to be very concise, but finally, we have looked at this within the framework of two important, of global processes that are taking place. On one end, this is not new. So as I was saying at the beginning, there are more and more initiatives that are happening, both led by IOM, led by other actors like our colleagues at the MAC, for example, they are based in Denmark. And there is an effort, a global effort to bring forward what Paola was saying at the beginning, the commitments that were made during the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, and really operationalize them by applying diaspora's engagement in different contexts. So an important initiative in this sense is the Framework for Diaspora Engagement Humanitarian Assistance that was created a couple of years ago and has been implemented and piloted ever since by IOMDC, but with a global perspective, and it's been piloted in cooperation with the Haiti Renewal Alliance, and it's been piloted so far in Haiti and Philippines. But there are opportunities for piloting every day, like in every new crisis. I think we should approach the crisis with a more structured approach. And then why this model, how this model fits within this global framework. This model that is drawn by the case study in Italy fits in this global framework in a way that kind of supports an element and a component that was a bit underlooked, and that's the one of diaspora engagement in country of residence. So in this case, Italy, to support diaspora's intervention, both in country of residence, so for the integration and the welcoming of refugees, but also in country of origin. And we're really excited really for this experience to fit and complement within the global framework. And then the last thing I will say is about some links between this model and the humanitarian development peace nexus, which I think is really at the core of this initiative. And definitely something that is obvious and everybody's aware of, diaspora's efforts are continuous over time. They are not limited by mandate, you know, humanitarian versus development. Diaspora's commitment doesn't have a project time frame and a cycle. So I think by leveraging this continuity of effort, we can more organically promote programs that go from the response to the recovery and bridging toward development. And also this, you know, by applying, for example, subgranting, by working on subgranting, we could try to identify and give priorities to some interventions that are able to meet shorter term needs while at the same time maintaining a developmental lens. We know that development is a lens that can be applied at all phases of the humanitarian response. And then also last but not least is to encourage partnership with local actors and streamlining the coordination in order to ensure longevity and sustainability of the intervention. There is more in the white paper around the nexus, but you know, these are just some macro areas. Some conclusions here. I think we all realize that unfortunately, the magnitude of crisis show us that there is need for a multi-stakeholder approach, and diasporas are key actors, and we need to keep really investing in this engagement. This is a remarkable case study. I have worked with this, in this area over the last 5 years, and I'm impressed about what IOM Rome has been able to do in these case studies and also in previous engagement efforts. So there is a lot to learn and a lot of like cross-fertilization to promote. The white paper will be soon available in English and Italian, and hopefully you will all receive the link. We'll be able to engage more, and we will remain available for also bilateral engagement. Thank you for your attention. I'll hand over the floor to Daniele.
Thank you very much, Roberta, and thank you very much for the presentation. Yes, there were many things to say, so I guess the time we were being too optimistic in thinking that 1 hour was enough to say everything that we wanted to say. But now is also the time for possible questions, if you have any. There is one that is already in the chat. Is about where we can see this map. I guess it's also where we can see the white paper. The white paper is going to be available, as Roberta was mentioning, very soon. We're just in the final steps for the publication, and it will be available on our website, but also we will try to share the link with all your contacts. And then, of course, about how, in case of diaspora organizations from Ukraine present in Italy, how to get in contact with us, we will put on the chat also our email address. And of course, please write to us so that you would be sure to be in our list, and we can actually also consider you for other conferences or for other initiatives. If you have questions, please just raise your hand and then we will unmute you, or again, you can write on the chat. Okay, okay. Yes, please, Daria.
Yes, hello. Yes, my name is Daria from DMAC, as already said. I just have a question. First of all, thank you very much for this presentation. It's really remarkable work you did. Do you plan to replicate this in general, IOM, to replicate this experience in other countries? Not only in Italy.
In other countries other than Italy, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Well, actually, then I would leave also to Roberta to answer on that, because she has a better overview on these kind of aspects. But from our point of view, of course, we would like also to this model to be used or replicated or just get and adapt it to other countries as well. Roberta, I leave it to you.
No, thank you, Daria. It's nice to have you here. And so, yes, replicability is exactly what we are aiming at. And replicability can happen on many levels. On one end, you know, the same country of residence, like Italy in this case, can replicate the same model with other communities when other, you know, disasters strike, unfortunately, or even in the recovery phase and bridging for the development, as we were saying. But also other country of residence should be able to use this model and adapt it and tailor it to their own context. Like, for example, this morning I was in touch with colleagues in Brussels, as IOM Belgium is now trying to engage the Turkish diaspora and work together to, you know, in the face of this massive tragedy that has hit the country. So obviously, you know, there are many cases in which this same type of engagement process will be relevant and will need to take place. And our hope here is to make it easier for new actors to embark in this engagement by having already some lessons learned and some steps. And actually, another important element here to mention is that IOM and the MAC plan to work very closely also to be sure that we learn, you know, we kind of maximize our own networks, our own capacities for better serving diaspora communities. So doing it not in replication or in overlapping of each other, but doing it in cooperation. Over.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you very much, Daria, for the question. Any other question? Martin Russell. Yes, fascinating presentation. In closing, you mentioned the need to continue investment in diaspora humanitarianism. Based on the white paper, what do you think is the next most strategic investment to be made by donors to progress, elevate the prominence of diaspora organizations in humanitarianism? Thanks. Roberta, this is for you.
Daniele, feel free to jump in. This is a tough question, obviously, Martin. Thank you for being here with us. I wouldn't expect any less from you. So this is open. I think this is open to brainstorming and to creative approach. I definitely the sub-granting model. This is something we are looking into, and we have seen how. What's the impact? I think the return on investment for diaspora organizations in terms of sub-grants is very high. Even little seed money can go a long way in terms of scaling up and in terms of boosting diaspora's intervention. And we are planning to collect, you know, experiences from not only from Italy, but from other contexts to kind of to build up more evidence. So I think that personally, I believe that's a model that should continue, but in a way that, as I said, shouldn't treat diaspora as, you know, traditional NGOs, but really boosting existing initiative, ensuring that this is done in a way that foster local actors, engagement and capacities, and also like really building on the added value of the diaspora's intervention. So there are some criteria there to take into account. There might be other financial efforts and financial investment modalities. For example, a traditional one, which I think has been used in the past and maybe can be replicated again, is the matching. You know, like diasporas can bring their own financial contributions matched by, for example, government and by donors in a way that can scale up the initiatives. And there are also some some modalities that involve private actors. For example, in the Philippines, what we are doing in the recovery phase, that doesn't work very much in the emergency phase, but in the recovery, we are working with microcredit institutions to allow vulnerable communities that are trying to rebuild after typhoons to use microloans for their reconstruction. And diaspora's remittances are playing the role of guarantees against these microloans for communities and members that otherwise would not be considered eligible for this type of financial tool. So these are just 3 quick examples, but just to conclude this, we are planning in April to have a side event at the Humanitarian Networking and Partnership Week in Geneva, organized by OCHA and other humanitarian actors, exactly to look into alternative financing to invest in diaspora's intervention, including the subgranting. So hopefully, if you can join us there, we will discuss more and hopefully come up with other innovative ideas. Over.
Thank you very much, Roberta. If I can add also on this, because I think it's important, of course, to provide investment that are financial investments, but looking at the perspective of a country of destination, I think it's also important for the institutions to invest their time and their energy also to create this kind of legal framework, or at least a conducive environment for all the diaspora organizations and the diaspora communities to be heard, because in those phases, I think they can make the difference. I don't know if there are other questions. So I would like really to thank you all very much for being here today. And of course, yes, Svitlana, one more question. How is the voice of Ukrainian refugees who have been in Italy for only 1 year included into this exercise? Well, yes, as I was mentioning, actually, it would be important for all diaspora organizations that didn't take part of the process, because of course we started working with the organizations that, as I mentioned, we knew or that were present or operational already. But for all the others, it would be really be important that you please get in contact with us. For us, it would be impossible to understand and to map out all the organizations that are there. But if you reach to us, it would be for sure we will include you in all our list or next initiatives. And thank you very much. And there is also another question by Dmitro. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everybody. I would like to ask, is it possible to have an exchange with experience with other diaspora in other countries? We are from Italy, and we would like to have a possibility to create official institutional representative of Ukrainian diaspora in Italy. And it would be really helpful to have this kind of exchange, and also maybe sort of documents to how to build our representation in Italy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mitro. Yes, I think having an exchange with other communities is also something Roberta is working on. So maybe you can answer to that, Roberta.
Okay. Hi, Dimitro. Thank you so much. I think there was one event that happened where that was led by IOM Ukraine, and there was an attempt to bring together Ukrainian diaspora organizations from different countries of residence. There were representatives from US, Canada, Italy, other European countries as well. Definitely, I think would be helpful to replicate because it was very well attended, was very appreciated and helpful. So I think we could work closely with colleagues in IOM Ukraine or other country of residence and see whether we can replicate this exchange at the transnational level. There have been also, there is the Global Diaspora Confederation. If you are able to check their website, they have been having consultations on a regular basis, focusing on the Ukrainian crisis. I think the last one was a few months ago, but there might be the interest and the need to organize another one in order to foster this peer-to-peer exchange. And I then eventually, it's also up to the organizations to create formalized networks, alliances, coalitions. An interesting example is from the Syrian diaspora. Unfortunately, the Syrian diaspora has been dealing with a decade of conflict and currently also affected by this current earthquake. And they have created transnational coalitions in order to ensure that this engagement is not just ad hoc, but takes place in a more regular, structured way. So this could be also an interesting case study to learn from. And we could put you in touch with colleagues from the Syrian diaspora. They are very generous in sharing their experience. Over.
Thank you very much, Roberta. And actually, Larissa Lara from Geneva, she's also sharing few other links that I think are also very, very useful on the chat. Then I see that Tatiana Esposito raised her hand. Please, Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Daniele. I would like to provide some information, trying to offer an example to Mitro, who asked for examples of building a formal representation of diaspora. We have been running an experience at the Ministry of Labor in the last years, addressed to young people with a migrant background, the so-called second generation of migrants. And we accompanied them through a process of formalizing a representation of young people of second generation. So we supported them with a capacity building intervention together with IOM. Once again, we supported them in building and formalizing this umbrella association of associations of young people with a migrant background coming from more than 40 countries around the world and living in Italy. So this could represent an example for this process of formalizing a representation, and this umbrella association now sits in formal tables and that has a dialogue with institutions and can have access to financing from European, national, even local institutional actors. So we could offer these as an example, and you can find more information on this experience, which is called CONGI, Coordinamento Nazionale of the New Italian Generations, on our portal, on our Integration of Migrants portal.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, because this is actually a great experience and a great example on how it is possible to build representation also from different diaspora organizations, or in this case, organizations that have a multicultural background. There is also, just to finish also on this mentioning, there is also another example, which is the called the National Diaspora Forum. That is actually a project that is going to create a forum for diaspora organizations in Italy. In that case, and this is also common to the CONGI experience, all diaspora organizations are coming from all different countries of affiliation or of origin. So we do not have many experiences of a formalized representation of diaspora organizations that are coming from one community only. And actually, this is also something that somehow we have been encouraging also through our work to make sure that the different diasporas can create platform and fora for their joint representation, rather than representation divided by communities that sometimes are already very difficult to bring together. So thank you very much. And now the time is really up, but thank you very much for all your, for the presence and for staying here until the end, but also for all your comments, suggestions, and questions. Stay in touch, really, just for to look to our website and to see when we are going to launch new initiatives, and especially for the white paper to be launched, to be shared soon. Today was the launching because we were very impatient to launch the white paper, even if the link is coming soon. And also for other new initiatives, but even for other questions or for just know better what we are doing. Thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon or the rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.